All right, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, guys. Today's episode is going to be especially pertinent to those of you who are poets thinking about trying to get your own collections out into the world, especially maybe a smaller collection, what is known as a chapbook. I'm going to do a deep dive into things that you want to be considering if you're trying to put your own collection together and putting that out into the world. And what better way to do this than bring in Bri, who has a collection coming out in the near future,
Woo-hoo!
which is exciting. Let's get it.
Thank you.
Yes. Bree, for those who aren't familiar with you, can I give you like 5, 10 seconds just to kind of introduce
Yeah.
yourself, who you are, what you're doing, things like that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, who am I? What am I doing? Yeah, my name is Bree. I'm based in LA, was born and raised here. I am a writer, an editor, a curator, a producer, a poet. I make music sometimes. And yeah, I'm just excited to be here, living life.
Got you.
Excited to talk about poetry. Yeah.
How is the poetry scene in I know a couple of LA poets, and I know a lot of them feel compelled to, at some point, make the jump to New York just
Yeah.
because New York's kind of the poetry mecca. Have you
Oh,
felt
yeah.
that urge at all? Like, what's going on in LA? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, yeah, no, I definitely feel that urge every day. I I also am someone who just I love New York. I've been to New York twice in my life, and it's like my favorite place in the States. So yeah, I just feel very drawn to the energy of New York. But yeah, the poetry scene in LA, it's a small scene. I would say you run into a lot of the same people. A lot of people know each other. And yeah, I think in places like New York, there's probably more opportunities and like more communities for poetry specifically. A lot of it in LA, I feel like is kind of grassroots and that you just sort of have to get yourself out there and promote, promote, promote. But there's not necessarily a like thriving poetry community. You have to like create it yourself.
That's very much in line with all my
Mhm.
California-based poets live here. Unfortunately, which on the one hand it's cool, but like on the other hand, it's like it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of
Yeah,
work.
it's true.
But I do want to hear a little bit more about this collection. So tell me a little bit. Tell us the name. Tell us about the publisher. Tell us what's the
Mhm.
process for kind of making that happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's called A Throat Full of Forest Dirt. It was published through Bottlecap Press. It is now out and available to order as of this past Friday, so 2 days ago where we're recording this. Yeah, and the book is essentially about I would say it's about a number of different things, but the main subject is essentially, desire, and it is desire as it presents itself through the lens of the artistic experience. Like, I tend to think that as creative types and as artists, our relationship to desire is very pertinent and it can feel like all consuming at times because I just feel like we're kind of just seekers. I think we are always looking for something, searching for something, trying to find inspiration from some place. And also, I think definitely for myself, and I think for a lot of other creatives too, there's like a tendency towards the grandiose or to be like interested
Mm,
in the grandiose and like having this like grand life. And I'm a person who's always kind of really struggled with those aspects of myself. And, I've always had a tendency to compare myself to other people throughout that experience. So it's about the relationship between desire and envy and also how that factors into again art, love, relationships, all that good stuff. Yeah.
mhm. Do you find that that's when you were putting this collection together, was that kind of a running theme that you noticed, like, oh, you know what? Oh, I have a lot of pieces talking about this. Let's just like jam them together and kind of see. Is that kind of the process that happened, or was it a little bit more
Yeah.
methodical? Or
Yeah, no, that's exactly how it happened. I try to write poetry at least a couple times a week. Sometimes I'll go through periods where I can't quite like grasp it as well as I can, like, at other moments in my life, but I try to write it frequently. And yeah, for a while I had just been noticing this pattern that I was writing a lot about the artistic experience as it relates to just always wanting things, always looking for things, always like searching for something. I think that kind of unfolded in tandem with me just sort of wiggling my way further into the LA art scene and just like encountering so many different people who were having similar experiences and like so many having so many interactions with people that were sort of centered around seeking and searching and like encountering that want within us and like acknowledging
Mhm.
that. So, yeah, I think it was like I was feeling that very heavily internally and then it was like reflected everywhere in my environment. And then I just realized, oh yeah, this is like thematically consistent. So yeah, I just put together a few poems, yeah.
I feel like California has a reputation for some of that. I'm not gonna. Maybe I'm projecting.
Yeah. No, no, I think you kinda hit the nail on the head. Like, I'm not saying you're wrong.
Talk to me about this cover.
Yeah, the cover was designed by Craig Mullins at Bottlecap.
Okay.
I think it's so dope. I'm so glad. I'm so happy with the way that it turned out. Yeah, so there's like a couple different things going on here. I'm really into mythology, and so I've been reading this book called The Power of Myth, which is essentially a transcribed conversation between Bill Moyer and Joseph Campbell, where he's Joseph Campbell is essentially just going on about mythology and like different themes that will show up in various world religions and so forth and so on. And so I got stuck on this chapter about snakes. It was really, just like really enthralled by like the symbolism and the mythology associated
Mm.
snakes. Like, you know, they snakes are associated with rebirth and obviously like, desire as well if you think about
Sorry.
like the
Yes.
story of
Yes.
yeah, of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, and then also the way that Campbell presents it in this book is like a snake is basically just it just exists to consume, like that's
Mm.
like
Mm.
the purpose and what a snake does on this earth. So I was just really intrigued by that. And snakes are also apparently associated with the moon and like lunar cycles and again changing and everything. And the moon, there's a lot of symbolism there associated with like deeper, heavier emotions, like maybe uncomfortable things that people don't necessarily want to think about or talk about. So I had asked for the rising moon and the setting sun,
Mm.
to sort of present this idea of like, okay, we're now going into this space where we're going to talk about some heavy stuff. For
Mhm.
me at least. Yeah,
Mhm.
some deeper emotional stuff. Yeah, and then the color, again, I was thinking green, envy, but I also associate green with like again, like
Mm.
desire, abundance, opulence, emotions. So yeah, that's why I have on my green today. Yeah.
Mhm. Do you find that they have their own like cover designers
hmm
and you kind of tell them what you're looking for and then
Yeah. Yeah. Craig Mullins, who is the as far as I can tell, the head honcho at Bottlecap actually like communicates with artists directly because when I found out that my work was gonna be published, there's like so many artists that I've worked to that, I immediately was like, oh yeah, maybe I could like hit up so and so or like blah blah blah. But yeah, no, he collaborates with you and designs the covers in alignment with what you're thinking of. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's a totally symbiotic process.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm.
Naturally, that's always going to change on depending on whoever you're working with for your press. Some presses will be like, "You choose the cover, you do whatever," and some people are like, "We choose the cover." And it sounds like this is kind of like a halfway
Yeah.
point. Um,
Yeah, I would say so. I love the way it looks, so
mhm,
I'm very pleased with it. Yeah.
mhm. I do have to ask the big question: Is
Mhm.
it glossy or is it matte?
Oh my gosh, I'm so, like, chaotic, I don't even have, like, a copy for myself yet. I'm gonna like I
Gotcha.
haven't
Okay.
even ordered my own copy yet. I have seen pictures of it in someone's hands, and I'm gonna say it's matte.
We don't know whose hands these were, but okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. Okay, we won't ask questions. It's all good.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm excited for. Be sure to take pictures when you get your first copy. I know. Who are you going to give your first copy to?
Oh my gosh, I've been thinking about that. Um, there's a section in the book where, I prattled off a couple acknowledgments, so people that immediately come to mind are, like, my mom, the people I work at an arts organization in LA called Level Ground, and we're a nonprofit and a production incubator that does like gallery exhibits and We have a wing that focuses on documentary films, and like we've gotten into Sundance before. And I was hired by them at the beginning of this year, and prior to that, I just joined like as an artist who was just looking for a creative community after the pandemic, and they really believed in me as someone who was just like so just did like had too much anxiety to put my work out there. So definitely like the folks that I've met at Level Ground who I think have really yeah helped me come into myself. My friend Maya, shout out to Maya.
Go Maya.
She's my best friend, and she's another person who has just always encouraged me to go for it. So probably those guys.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
Last thing about the book directly that I have. How did you come up with the title? Are we talking about a line from a
Mm.
poem, a title of a poem,
Yeah, that is
nowhere
a
in the book at
line.
all?
It's just pulled out of thin
You
air.
never know.
Yeah, that's a line from a poem, yeah, in the book, and, it's mentioned in actually, the description there that you're looking at,
Ooh,
but I'm really interested in symbolism associated with like mythology and fairy tales and so forth and so on. And so I've just always been really entranced by the concept of the forest being this place where people go in to experience like immense change or like these intense like um, emotional trials that force them to confront deeper aspects of themselves and help them become a different person. I've always been really fascinated by that idea, like in a like Little Red Riding Hood and things of that nature. So yeah, when I wrote that particular piece, I think that's sort of what I was envisioning in my head. Yeah.
mhm. What do you think the process was like in general? So, what was involved? How many places you submit to? Things that
Mm,
you thought to be were easy, things you thought were difficult.
that's a really good question. Um, Honestly, I'm gonna say like 80 to 90% of it is just getting out of my own way and just, finding enough courage and confidence to actually submit and put my stuff out there.
Mhm,
I read my poetry in front of people for the first time this past summer, so in June, and, I think that was definitely, the sort of the first step in believing that, A, I'm not half bad at this, B, I can like, I can do it, and C, it's not scary, and it's something that I can actually navigate through without, having to attach all of this like these overwhelming like feelings of anxiety with it. So yeah, I would say a lot of it is just having the courage and the wherewithal to keep going, keep practicing, um, understanding that when you start submitting, 9 times out of 10, it's you're gonna have to face a lot of no's just because the market is really saturated. And I also say that as someone who has worked at two different literary journals, we get loads and loads and loads of submissions. So a lot of the time it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with like the quality or the content of someone's writing. It's just like, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people are submitting.
mhm,
So, contextualizing it in that way and understanding it has nothing to do with you and you just need to like continue to be persistent and tenacious and put yourself out there. And yeah, again, just practice and just believing that, it sounds like kind of corny, but just believing that you can do it. I would say is so
mhm,
much of the battle, just recognizing that you can do it, and
mhm,
just
mhm,
persisting.
mhm. I appreciate you bring up the fact just about editing. Like, I think a lot of people assume they take the rejection personal, especially people just
Mhm,
starting off. I think a lot of people also aren't considering the specific context. The best time to submit to a journal is as soon as they open,
mhm,
because the reality is that journals don't have unlimited space. You're
right.
dealing with limits by page, you're doing limits with size, with production runs and things like that. So the reality is the sooner you get in, the better, because as they're taking in submissions, they're starting to realize, oh, I'm thinking especially like single poem submissions, but this can also apply to
Mhm,
books and things like that as well. Like, you might be realizing from an editor's perspective, like, oh, you know what? We are starting to identify a theme in a lot of these poems that we're taking. So let's kind of run with that. Or
right.
just random things like that just happen as you're putting together an issue. And
Mhm,
so if your poem gets submitted later, you might have missed out on that opportunity. So they're like, oh, if we had
Mhm.
seen this poem a couple months ago, yeah, it'd be a shoe in. But now, no, we have a direction for this issue, and we just don't have a
Right.
place. In best
Yeah,
case scenario, they'll shelve it to be like, you know what, we'll use this poem an issue down the line. But not all journals are that generous, and they'll just be like, hey, just didn't fit this time. Try us again.
right. Yeah, and then
But
also a lot of the time we're working with, a smaller staff of people, so
facts.
it's like not we can't we sometimes just genuinely don't have, like, the physical manpower to, be able to go through everything or the time necessarily. So, yeah, it's a number of factors.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, so I strongly encourage people, please submit
Please submit,
early.
yeah.
Please submit early. Now, one of the things that I noticed about Bottlecap, and we were talking about this backstage
Mhm.
beforehand, Bottlecap is they're taking chapbooks, or it seems like they're releasing a chapbook every week, which is
Yeah,
wild.
yeah,
I would not
it's
want to be on that
unbelievable.
team.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's
personally,
fascinating, yeah.
kudos to them. Um, so for people, for poets looking at submitting, to maybe this is a place. Do you know if they have? I haven't looked into their submission window. Do you know, are they rolling submissions? Are there submission times? I don't know if you know offhand.
I actually don't know offhand. I wanna say that they're rolling submissions, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, and the wait period for me was about 4 months, and,
Okay.
yeah, I just, sort of assumed that, it was gonna be a no, but, yeah, I think they're probably again, similar kind of thing, like, so backed up with submissions, it takes a while to go through all of them and make the selections, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm.
I want to talk about some of the logistics for this. So, your print run, how many copies are you getting? What's involved here?
Well, what I'm doing first is this has been, such a quick process that I feel like I'm kind of running to catch up. So I'm kind of, figuring a lot of this out as I go along, but what I'm gonna do first is, reach out to a number of independent bookstores that I have contacts at or connections with just by virtue of the work that I do and have done, and I'm leaning towards just seeing who actually wants to pick the book up first and then, purchasing copies, based on that. But yeah, this is like it's a very on the fly kind of thing. Like even
Welcome
just
to poetry. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, even just getting to a release date, it was, I found out that I was getting published, right around Halloween, and
Wow, that's super
it was
fast. Okay.
so fast. Yeah, and then, Friday, I was like, "Okay, it's out." So, yeah, I'm running to keep up.
Yeah. That's a very fast turnaround for people doing publishing. Like, there's plenty of people that,
Yeah,
especially like for chapbooks, maybe a little bit faster, but like for books, it's like, oh, cool, you want our contest, all right? Your book will be coming out 2025,
right.
and like the fact you're getting it this soon is wild. That's great.
Yeah, I was surprised too. Mhm.
Also, do you know, does Bottle Press, do they give you an ISBN number? Do you know? Like, can you sell this on Amazon and things like that?
I don't believe we can. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I think we're only allowed to sell it through, like, independent
Through the
resale,
press.
like consignment and
Independent.
wholesale.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So that's something else for people looking at chapbook contests, because there are many. Not all chapbooks come with like ISBN numbers and things like that. Some do, some don't. So if you're interested in trying to get something published through Amazon and things like that, or like bookshop.org and things, it can be difficult if that's not included. Now, there may be a way that you can get it yourself if you want to pay for an ISBN number, but I don't know if you want to
Mhm.
run through those loops. Does Bottlecap Press, do you know, did they have like a cash component as well, or is it just issues of the book?
It's just issues of the book.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe it is, they operate through this particular app, and the way that it rolls out is for every $20 that you make on a sale, they'll cash you out that way. Again, still kind of trying to catch up with the process for consignment and wholesale because I know that would be specifically through the website. Um, but yeah, yeah, I wanna say it's an even 50-50 split. I feel like
Mhm.
I came on here not
No, you're
not
good. No, you're good. I'm throwing a lot at you. No, you're all good. These are things I want people to be considering when they're looking at chapbook
of course.
contests. Were you looking at other contests as well, or was this just like, I'm just going to do one for one and let's see what happens? And
Yeah, I submitted at one other place, one other publication, and yeah, it was just honestly just on a whim. I think a lot of the time I tend to operate from a place of let's just see what happens.
yeah.
Might work out, it might not, but I think it's better to just take a leap of faith and
Mhm,
see what shakes out. So yeah, it was kind of just something that I did on a whim, honestly, not really expecting anything because again, I'm very used to understanding that sometimes these presses get really, really backed up. And so I was like, but yeah, it was, I would say, spur of the moment. But again, I already had the manuscript put together. I already had the ideas that I had been toying with and floating around with for a couple months at that point. So yeah, I was like,
mhm,
yeah, this seems logical.
mhm, mhm. I want you to try to put your editor hat on. I can't help but like look at your hat as I'm saying it. And like if you had to decide like why you think they picked your collection out of all the other collections you received, like what do you think
Hmm.
separates the collection that you have out there right now or is coming out from other collections that they were looking
Mm,
at?
that's a good idea. Good question, I should say. Yeah, what I will say is I think my writing is distinct in that I am so inspired again by motifs surrounding mythology and symbolism. So I think that a lot of the time my writing is interesting or exciting for people to read because it's like so much of it is filtered through this lens of mystique, I would say. And I think that's interesting for people. When I first started sharing my work before I was really published anywhere, I was just posting poems of mine on social media, and that was typically the kind of response that I would get, that people were intrigued by them. So I think there's kind of like an element of mystery to um, the stuff that I write that, yeah, is interesting and exciting and different for people.
Mhm. Now that you have the chapbook out, what's next? I know you're thinking about it. There's
Oh
always what's
man,
next.
what's next? What's next? What's next? I long term, I would love to be able to start a magazine of my own one day, that would, specifically platform and focus on Black women in music, fashion, and film. I'm very interested in film. I would love to start my own production studio one day. Directing is something I can definitely see myself doing long term. In the interim, I'm working on a novel. In my brain, I refer to it as like the never-ending novel that I've been working on since the beginning of time, really since the start of 2020. But yeah, I also am really hoping to get a developmental editing fellowship that I submitted to recently to specifically
Okay.
some help with working on that project. So I think like the next step in my writer brain is to direct my energy to trying to finish this novel and just making sure it's decent.
What are some of those differences you find between putting like a poetry collection together versus putting an entire
Mhm.
novel together?
I actually find that it's easier to write poetry. Um, when I write prose or short stories or novels, I'm always thinking about it through the lens of the technicalities of writing and storytelling. So, okay, if point A happens, it has to logically lead to point B. How do we get there? How do the character dynamics unfold and blah, blah, blah. So there's like a level of engineering, I would say, that happens there where I feel very present but disconnected from what allows me to write poetry, which may sound a little confusing. But when I write poetry, it just sort of feels like an expression of something that needs to find itself in the world for me. It's a very emotional process, and it's very therapeutic for me. It's very healing, which is another reason why I think people are drawn to my work because I think people can feel that energy coming from it. Um, yeah, and it's just for me, poetry. It's almost like it's like taking a breath or like releasing a breath. It just feels very natural, very easy. Um, And I just think it's so interesting because it's such a mysterious process. I don't understand how it comes together or what elements sort of coalesce in order to actually make a thing, a poem appear in front of you, but it feels very fluid for me. Whereas in working on my novel, again, I feel like I kind of have to put on like an engineering hat a little bit and like be very detailed and
Mhm,
specific and like aware of how the novel itself is building and how I can sort of direct where that
mhm,
goes.
mhm. It almost kind of feels more like editing in a way
Yeah.
when you're like curating like a collection or things like that. I don't know if you get that same sort of energy.
Yeah, yeah, no, I definitely do, and I think that's one of the things that's so interesting about being an editor who writes. I think
Mm,
sometimes it's hard to kind of make that distinction, that separation. Like I've really in the last year, I've really gotten into like stream of consciousness journaling because what I used to do when I would write stories is I would be editing it as I wrote, and I'd be like, "No, no, 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 that's not right," or like, "This character, like, shouldn't say this," or like, maybe like this passage doesn't flow very well, but this one does. And yeah, I think that's something that a lot of editors run into when they're writing prose and stories and novels, and you have to be able to just, put that aside and actually like get into the rhythm and the flow of the piece. And I think poetry really helps with that as well. It's good practice for that.
mhm, mhm. How would you say like your experiences just with editing collections and being part of teams that are creating projects like that? How do you think that's carried over to your own writing?
I think it's made me a much stronger writer. Um, Also, just being able to read other people's work. And I think this is true of novels and novel writing as well. But when you read other work that's just really strong and really good, I feel like it almost, and when you do it consistently, it almost improves your own writing through this really interesting process of osmosis. And I think just being able to take in so much content that was good and like have like discussions with a team of people about like what made it good, what made it strong. It's definitely something that uh you know, like I definitely like put it like in the back of my head, and I think it has influenced a lot of how I write today because I remember those notes and I remember being in those meetings and the things that people discussed and like what
Mhm,
made the piece work and having conversations about that.
mhm. How intense were those meetings? I know different journals operate different ways.
When I worked at Hecate, it was also remote. Hecate was London-based, so, it was, less intense, in that we never really we never really worked as a group, um, but the content of Hecate was, much more emotionally dense, which can be, like, intense in its own way, but yeah, when I worked on, Skew, which is the magazine. It's a Black owned and operated and queer owned and operated magazine um, based in Los Angeles. We just launched our fourth edition on Juneteenth a couple of months
S-
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm the managing editor of that issue. And yeah, when I worked on that, we were with a full team and yeah, it would get intense at times. I think just because I think just because we all cared about it so much, and we all wanted to make sure that we were producing really good work and, supporting people that we genuinely believed in. So, yeah, I think passion can filter into intensity in those environments. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. For those who aren't in the know, what would you just describe as being the biggest difference between like a managing editor and someone just kind of like on the editing team?
Yeah. More stress.
That's a fair response.
More more sleepless nights. Yeah, and similarly to how I've done everything in the artistic sphere in the last couple of years. When I took that position, I had worked at Hecate and I had worked at another publication called Storyteller's Refrain as a poetry editor, and at Hecate as a poetry editor and a social media manager. But I had never been in like I'd never been a managing editor before. So, it was offered to me, I think, because honestly, I think people liked me and I'm a pretty good writer. And again, it was a lot of learning as I went. It was a lot of catching up again, like having faith that I could do it, kind of just taking a leap of faith, trying to be as courageous and confident as I could. And I would say the biggest challenge, or like the thing that's the most distinct difference, um, I think there's more pressure because as a managing editor, I've felt and feel more closely tied to the magazine as a whole. So I think you feel like that greater sense of and weight of responsibility. Whereas if you're working on like a larger team of editors, I think sometimes you can feel more separate from it in a way. But as a managing editor, I definitely had and have this sense of like, oh, this is like in part like my baby. Like this is like a child that we have to nurture and make sure that the child walks and then runs and then goes to school. So, it's just bearing the responsibility of taking care of people, I would say, because I was always like, I just want to make sure that the people in this magazine and the people who have contributed to past issues feel and are well represented. Like I've had a couple different positions where I was like leading a team of artists, or where I was in a lead position. Like I curated and co-created this really big art exhibit in 2022, and it was a similar feeling. Like, okay, I have to make sure everyone here is taken care of, and people are trusting me with and us with their art, which is like the most vulnerable parts of themselves. So it was just feeling like I was a mom to like 50 people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Would you find that like, well, obviously this doesn't scare you away because you mentioned you want to start your own new journal,
Yeah.
which is basically
Somehow,
like
some way.
yeah, right. So like, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, what is the journal that
Mhm.
you want to start? What's the goal with it? Why would it be different than? That's probably
Mhm.
the biggest question. Why would this
Mhm.
journal? What need is it serving that you think is not
Mm.
currently being served in the market?
I will say, as someone who looks like me and comes from where I come from, I'm from South Central Los Angeles, and I feel like you know, I always had an interest in things that, people told me I wasn't supposed to have an interest in, or that were deemed weird. And, I was ostracized for gravitating towards or liking or enjoying things that were just aligned with my personality. But it was like, oh, Black girls from South Central or wherever, honestly, they're not supposed to like those things or do those things. Whether that's like music or certain TV shows or movies or what have you. And I've just seen this beautiful movement emerging in pop culture over the last, I'm gonna say, like 2 or 3 years or so, of Black women who have just kind of been like, "Screw that, I'm just gonna do whatever I want
Mm,
and be who I am," and lean into, eccentricities or being out there, or just, like, allowing yourself to be seen in a capacity that, we aren't often allowed to be seen in. I think people put a lot of limitations on women as a whole and Black women, specifically. So I would just love to be able to curate a space where people can find that, and I would love to be able to take so many of these incredible artists that I'm seeing and just give them a platform to not only express themselves, but kind of like offer a way forward for other people who still might be struggling with that. Because I will say I felt very ostracized growing up. I was bullied a lot, and looking back, had I had an example of that, I think it would have been easier for me to accept myself in the way that I do now.
That's a very fair answer. I get that.
Yeah.
Um, would you plan on doing this yourself? Would you plan on having a team?
I would love to have a team of people. Again, I've met so many incredible people in the last couple years. I can already sort of envision like putting together a team of Avengers in my brain. Yeah, I'd love to work with a group of people on this and, just collaborate with some of the artists that I've met and hopefully some of the people that I've become fans of over the last few years. That would be awesome.
Ooh, who have
Yeah.
you become fans of? Give some shout outs. Tell
Oh my
us.
gosh. The first person who comes to mind is Doechii. She's a rapper and R&B singer, and I think she's on tour with Doja Cat right now. But she's so incredible, and yeah, just so out there and weird and eccentric. There's an artist from the Bay Area who I found out recently knows like a friend of mine, so I'm kind of like, can we hook it up? But yeah, her name is Spelling with three L's, and she put out an album in 2021 called The Turning Wheel, which is like one of the most beautiful pieces of art I have ever heard, ever listened to. And she's a singer-songwriter, and that's a person who there are songwriters who really inspire me as a writer specifically. And I just think she's a poet. Her lyricism is just beautiful. It's like so fantastical and whimsical. It just like draws you into a different place. Um, I love FKA Twigs. I mean, she's like a huge artist now, but just people in that cohort. I'm just really inspired by those women.
Got you. Bree, before we kind of wrap up, because lots of good things about the book, I kind of want to go into like a rapid fire mode, if that's okay with you.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
Cool. I have some random little topics here. I want you to just kind of tell me whatever is the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay, cool.
Okay? You
Yeah.
ready? Okay. First things first. Favorite poet.
Sylvia Plath.
Why write poetry?
It's a way to express yourself at your deepest, most vulnerable, most intimate level, and anything that you're holding on to that needs to be released. It's like the most beautiful, magical outlet through which you can release it.
Simile or metaphor?
Metaphor.
Biggest poetry lesson you've learned?
Mm. Write a bunch of poems, like hundreds, before you submit anywhere, because the first ones are going to be kind of cringe.
Write 100 bad poems. Yeah, it's like videos. 100 bad videos. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. Best way to get published?
Tenacity. Uh, keep putting yourself out there. Again, like I was saying earlier, just remember it's a numbers game. It has nothing to do with you. You are a good writer. Tell yourself that over and over and over again. Continue to work on your craft. Study writers and poets whose work inspires you and that you'd like to emulate. And just keep going.
Spoken word or page poet?
I'm gonna say page poet. However, now that I've read my poetry live a couple times, that's a really liberating experience. And if anyone is out there listening to this and hasn't endeavored to do that yet, I would definitely do that. It's awesome. It's a really great feeling.
Why does poetry beat prose?
Ooh. Oh my gosh. Um, because again, it's so I just think poetry is so ethereal. I think it's so mysterious. I find it so intriguing and otherworldly. And again, I just think similarly to when someone makes a song, it's just the most pure, like unrefined essence of a person in front of you. And I just think it's like one of the few avenues that we have to be able to like see someone, like truly see someone. So I just think it's beautiful.
Then why does prose beat poetry?
Prose beats poetry because ooh, um,
It doesn't.
it's
No, I'm just
easier.
kidding.
It's easier to write. It's less it's less strain on your emotions for
Oh
me.
man, shots fired. Yeah, okay, that's cool. That's cool.
I'm sorry to the prose community.
No, no apologize. Yes. How to become an editor?
Hmm. I would say honestly, keep an eye out on independent publications, see when they're hiring. I would say pay your dues first and work as a volunteer and get the experience. And then just continue to network with people and surround yourselves with people who are working in those spheres, people who are interested in starting a magazine, people who have maybe like a nonprofit that has a wing that's a magazine. And yeah, so much of, I feel like so much of editing, yes, but also just working in the creative sphere. It's just about tenacity and it's about putting yourself out there. Yeah.
The best part of editing.
Mm, the best part of editing, I would say, honestly, just getting to read people's work. Maybe that's a hokey answer, but I love reading people's work. I love discovering new writers that I didn't know of previously. There's a writer that we worked with in the last edition of SKU. Her name is Lene Voss, and she wrote this incredible piece about like her experience growing up in church. And I was just like, so like my jaw was on the floor reading this piece. It was just like so incredibly evocative of like specific memories that I had from my childhood, and just the imagery was just so lush, and I just love being able to discover new people that I can nerd out about. So reading people's writing, definitely.
The most difficult poem you've written.
Wow, that's a hard one. I feel like a lot of them are very difficult
I
for
feel
me.
that.
Yeah,
They
it's
all fight
challenging.
back. It's horrible.
They fight
They
back.
all fight back.
They definitely fight back. There's actually a poem in this collection called Afterbirth, and I had to write it a few times before I felt like it was solid enough to have a place in the public eye. I think just because a lot of the poetry that I write, it tends to lean on the shorter side. So I think it was a combination of me actually attempting to write something that was a little bit longer and more robust. And then also, it's about isolation and how I'm sort of like doubly, so intrigued by isolation, but also it can be like such a painful experience for me. So I think also just finding the right language and tools to communicate that was challenging.
Brie, who should do poetry?
Everyone, everybody should do poetry. Yeah, yeah. Against like so many like Hallmark card answers, but like, it's such a good way to express yourself, and it doesn't have to be perfect. I think a lot of the time people have like the creative itch within them and they stop themselves from doing it because they're concerned that they're like not good, or that it's not going to like measure up to whomever. But it doesn't have to. It can just exist for what it is, and it can just exist as an expression of whatever you're feeling or experiencing. And so yeah, I think that it's a really great outlet. It's a great way to get to know yourself better. And yeah, I think everyone should do it.
Cool. Bree, any final thoughts for everyone here?
Um, let's see. I'm just grateful to be here. Honestly, I'm grateful to have this. Yeah, yeah, it's so
I
nice to
said
meet
I
you.
wouldn't cry today, Bree.
It's nice to meet you after like lurking around your social media pages for a while.
We've met in a way. It's okay.
we've
It's okay.
we've yeah, we've met. But yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to like have had this opportunity to meet you and talk to you. And yeah, A Throat Full of Forest Dirt. It's out now
Let's
through
go.
Bottlecap Press. Yeah,
Let's go. We're
check
super
it out.
excited for your collection. Congratulations again. It's such good news. We're here to celebrate.
Thank you.
That's what's up.
Thanks so much.
Cool. Bree, I'll let you go. Everyone, I'll let you go. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Bree will be in touch, I'm sure, on the socials and things like that. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Have a good night.
Hey, you too. Take care, everyone. Have a good
Bye-bye.
day. Have a good night. Have a good afternoon. Take care, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.